Steam billows from the locomotive as it grinds to a halt at Algona Station, Iowa, July 1944. The platform trembles under the weight of military transport cars, their doors sliding open to reveal rows of men in faded Wehrmacht uniforms. Townspeople gather behind wooden barriers, craning their necks to glimpse the enemy they've only seen in newsreels and propaganda posters plastered across post office walls. These are German prisoners of war, captured in North Africa and the European theater, now arriving in the American heartland to work the fields their own soldiers once dreamed of conquering. 200 prisoners step onto Iowa soil, blinking in the bright Midwest sun that seems impossibly clean compared to the smoke and dust of battlefields. They carry nothing but the clothes on their backs and memories of Nazi propaganda warnings about American brutality. They've been told to expect starvation, beatings, perhaps execution. The Führer's ministers have painted Americans as savage gangsters who will show no mercy to captured German soldiers. Instead, they find themselves loaded onto trucks and driven through cornfields stretching to the horizon, past red barns and white farmhouses that look nothing like the bombed-out ruins they left behind in Europe. The landscape is untouched by war, pristine and abundant in ways that seem almost obscene to men who've watched their continent tear itself apart. The United States faces a crisis in the summer of 1944. Victory in Europe seems inevitable after the successful D-Day landings in Normandy, but the war effort has drained the nation's farms of their most vital resource: young men. Millions of American farmers now wear military uniforms in France, Italy, and the Pacific Islands, fighting battles thousands of miles from the land they once cultivated. Back home, crops ripen in fields with no hands to harvest them. In Iowa alone, sugar beet acreage has exploded from 9,000 to 14,000 acres, driven by wartime demand for domestic sugar production after the Japanese conquest of the Philippines cut off cane sugar supplies. Without workers, this bounty will rot where it grows, a catastrophic waste the nation cannot afford. The solution arrives in the form of an unprecedented program that would have seemed unthinkable just years earlier. Under the Geneva Convention of 1929, prisoners of war can be employed in non-military labor, a provision designed to keep captive soldiers productive while ensuring they are not forced to contribute directly to the enemy's war effort. The United States government, recognizing both humanitarian obligations and economic necessity, brings 435,000 Axis prisoners to American soil between 1943 and 1946. Iowa receives thousands of these men, establishing major camps at Algona and Clarinda, with dozens of smaller branch camps scattered across farming counties where labor shortages threaten to cripple agricultural production. The arrangement is straightforward. Farmers pay the government for prisoner labor, the government manages the camps and ensures Geneva Convention compliance, and everyone benefits from the harvest that feeds both civilians and soldiers. Camp Algona sits on the Kossuth County Fairgrounds, a site that hosted livestock competitions and pie contests before the war transformed it into a facility housing 3,000 German prisoners behind barbed wire and guard towers. The government spends $120,000 on camp operations, money that flows directly into the local economy through purchases of supplies, food, and services. Farmers, desperate for workers to save their crops, line up to request labor details. The camp generates $3.5 million in agricultural production during its operation, a staggering sum that keeps Iowa's farms productive while American boys fight overseas. The economic impact ripples through the region, sustaining communities that might otherwise have collapsed under the strain of wartime labor shortages. The prisoners march through the camp gates expecting the worst. Nazi propaganda has prepared them for torture, starvation, perhaps summary execution in the American style they've been told mirrors gangster films. The Geneva Convention exists on paper, they've been told, but Americans are savages who will ignore it the moment it becomes inconvenient. As they file into the barracks, they brace themselves for brutality, for the treatment they know German camps inflict on Soviet prisoners, for the cruelty they assume is universal in wartime. Instead, they find clean wooden buildings with real beds, mattresses stuffed with straw but comfortable nonetheless, and wool blankets to ward off Iowa's cold nights. American guards watch them with professional detachment, not hatred. No one strikes them. No one screams. No one drags prisoners away for interrogation or punishment. The cognitive dissonance is immediate and profound. Everything they've been told is a lie. or at least a gross distortion of reality. The Americans are stern but not cruel, watchful but not sadistic, following rules that seem to matter more than revenge. Then comes dinner, and the world shifts on its axis. The prisoners line up at the mess hall still wary, still expecting the meager rations of a prison camp, perhaps watery soup and stale bread like they've heard about in Soviet camps. What they receive instead changes everything. Plates piled with scrambled eggs, thick strips of bacon still sizzling with fat, fresh bread with real butter that melts into golden pools, glasses of cold milk that taste impossibly rich, bowls of vegetables, green beans, and carrots that are fresh, not canned or rotted. And for dessert, something many have never tasted even in peacetime, apple pie, still warm from the oven, with a flaky crust and sweet filling that seems impossible in a world at war. One prisoner, a former infantryman from Bavaria who fought in North Africa before capture, stares at his plate in disbelief. He's lost 20 pounds since being drafted 2 years ago, surviving on black bread and watery soup supplemented by whatever could be scavenged from the battlefield. Now, as a prisoner of the enemy, he faces more food than he's seen since before the war began. He eats slowly at first, afraid it's a trick, a final meal before execution, a cruel joke before the real treatment begins. But the guards don't come. The food is real. This is simply dinner. The same dinner that will be served tomorrow and the day after and every day for as long as the war continues. The contrast with home becomes unbearable to contemplate. In Germany, civilian rations have been cut to starvation levels as the Reich diverts every resource to the military. Families in Berlin receive 1 to 2 pounds of bread per week, a spoonful of fat if they're lucky, perhaps some potatoes if the distribution system hasn't broken down. Meat is a distant memory, reserved for soldiers at the front. Butter doesn't exist for civilians anymore. Children grow thin and hollow-eyed, their growth stunted by malnutrition, while their fathers fight and die for the fatherland that cannot feed them. The Allied bombing campaign has shattered supply lines and destroyed food storage facilities, compounding shortages that were already severe. Here in Iowa, prisoners eat according to United States Army standards, receiving between 3,000 and 3,500 calories per day, the same rations American soldiers receive, supplemented by items from the camp commissary, where prisoners can spend their meager wages on cigarettes, candy, and toiletries. Breakfast brings eggs, bacon, butter, milk, and bread. Lunch includes meat, vegetables, and fruit. Dinner repeats the abundance. And always, impossibly, there is dessert. Apple pie becomes a symbol of American plenty, a daily reminder that the enemy lives in a world of abundance that Germany can no longer imagine. Within weeks, the prisoners begin to change physically. Hollow cheeks fill out as muscles rebuild. Ribs disappear under healthy flesh. Men who arrived gaunt and exhausted, their bodies worn down by years of inadequate rations and the stress of combat, start to look like the propaganda posters of Aryan health the Reich once celebrated. Camp doctors document weight gains that vary by individual but average between 10 and 20 pounds, with some severely malnourished prisoners gaining even more. The transformations are visible and undeniable, proof that American captivity means better nutrition than German military service. The prisoners whisper among themselves in the barracks after lights out. This cannot be real. This must be a temporary show for Red Cross inspectors who visit camps to ensure Geneva Convention compliance. Soon the real treatment will begin, the cruelty they've been promised. But days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and the food keeps coming. Apple pie with meals, fresh milk whenever they want it, portions so large they cannot finish them, an unthinkable luxury for men who've spent years scraping plates clean and hoarding crusts of bread. The letters home begin cautiously. Prisoners are allowed to write to their families under Geneva Convention rules, though every word passes through military censors who check for coded messages or intelligence information. They craft their messages carefully, knowing that admitting comfort might seem like betrayal to families suffering at home, but unable to suppress the truth of their situation. A corporal from Hamburg writes to his mother, "I am well fed and treated fairly, according to international law. Do not worry about me. I am safe and healthy." Between the lines, his mother reads what he cannot say directly. He is safer and better fed than she is, huddling in a bomb shelter, while British and American planes reduce her city to rubble. As the letters multiply and make their way across the Atlantic through Red Cross channels, the irony becomes impossible to ignore. Prisoners write to families huddling in bomb shelters, to wives stretching rations to feed hungry children, to parents watching their cities burn under Allied bombing raids that come day and night without mercy. And they write, as carefully as censorship allows, "I eat better here than you do in Berlin." Some are more direct, risking the censor's pen. Being captured was like winning the lottery. The words seem obscene, a betrayal of the fatherland, yet they are true. Defeat has brought salvation. Surrender has brought abundance. German families share these letters, passing them from hand to hand in the rubble of their neighborhoods, reading them by candlelight in cellars that serve as homes after bombing destroyed the buildings above. The contrast is devastating and impossible to ignore. Their sons and husbands, captured by the enemy, feast on American abundance while they starve under Nazi rule that promised victory and delivered only suffering. Some begin to question everything they've been told about the war, about the enemy, about the inevitable victory the Führer promises in radio broadcasts that sound increasingly desperate. If the Americans are such savages, why do they feed prisoners better than Germany feeds its own people? Morning comes early at Camp Algona. Prisoners assemble for roll call at dawn, standing in formation while guards count and recount, ensuring no one has vanished in the night. The ritual is repeated multiple times daily, a security measure that becomes routine. Then comes the work assignment. Trucks arrive to transport labor details to farms across Kossuth County and beyond, carrying prisoners to fields where they will spend 8 hours harvesting corn and sugar beets, processing hemp for rope production, working in canning facilities that preserve food for military and civilian consumption. The labor is hard but not cruel, the hours long but not impossible, the pace demanding but not murderous. 30,000 German prisoners across the United States work in the hemp program alone, producing rope for the Navy's ships that blockade their homeland. In Iowa, they harvest sugar beets with the same efficiency they once brought to military operations, working in teams that develop their own rhythms and techniques. They learn to drive tractors, operate machinery, work in coordination under the supervision of American farmers who need their labor too desperately to waste time on hatred or revenge. The work is honest and productive, a strange contrast to the destruction they participated in as soldiers. The prisoners earn wages for their labor, 60 to 75 cents per day in camp script, money they can spend at the commissary on cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and other small luxuries. It's not much, barely enough to matter in economic terms, but it's more than they had as soldiers, and infinitely more than their families have at home where the economy has collapsed under the weight of total war. Some prisoners save their script, hoarding it like treasure. Others spend it immediately on small comforts that make captivity more bearable. The farmers who employ them are pragmatic men shaped by the Depression and now by war. They need workers, not enemies. They need their crops harvested, not ideological purity or revenge against the nation that started this war. So they supervise the prisoners with stern fairness, neither friendly nor cruel, focused on the work at hand and the harvest that must be brought in before weather or time destroys it. During breaks, they share water and sometimes food. Small gestures emerge that transcend the boundaries of war. A farmer's wife sending out sandwiches and lemonade, a prisoner receiving a few fresh eggs to supplement his dinner, cigarettes exchanged for a job well done, or a piece of machinery repaired with German engineering skill. Language barriers begin to break down through the universal language of work. Prisoners learn English words for farming tasks: plow, harvest, corn, beet, tractor, barn, field. Farmers pick up basic German commands and phrases, enough to communicate about work if not about deeper matters. They are not friends exactly, but neither are they the mortal enemies propaganda demands. They are men working together to bring in a harvest, united by the universal language of agriculture and the shared understanding that crops don't care about politics or nationality. The land demands work, and work creates unexpected bonds. One farmer in Kossuth County supervises a detail of 12 Germans harvesting his sugar beet crop, backbreaking work that requires strength and endurance. At first, he watches them with suspicion, his shotgun never far from reach, remembering newsreels of German atrocities and thinking about his own son fighting in France. But as days pass, he recognizes their skill and dedication. These are farm boys themselves, men who know the land and respect the work, who understand the rhythm of harvest and the urgency of bringing in crops before frost. By harvest's end, He invites them to share lunch at his table, a gesture that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. His wife serves them sandwiches and lemonade, and for a moment, sitting in the shade of an Iowa barn, the war feels very far away. Back at camp, life develops rhythms beyond work. The prisoners organize athletic clubs playing soccer and volleyball in the compound yard, competitions that become fierce and passionate as men channel their energy into sport. They form theatrical groups, performing plays in German for their fellow prisoners, creating culture and entertainment in captivity. Church services are held every Sunday, Protestant and Catholic, led by prisoner chaplains who provide spiritual comfort to men far from home and uncertain of their futures. The camp store does brisk business in cigarettes and candy, small luxuries that make confinement more bearable. Men write letters, read books from the camp library stocked with German-language volumes, and try to maintain some semblance of normal life in their abnormal circumstances. In the autumn of 1944, a German architect named Eduard Kaib begins an extraordinary project that will outlast the camp and the war itself. Using scrap wood and simple tools, he carves a full-scale nativity scene for the camp's Christmas celebration. Working through the winter in a workshop provided by camp authorities, he creates life-sized figures of Mary, Joseph, the infant Jesus, shepherds, wise men, and animals, each carved with meticulous detail that reflects his professional training and artistic skill. The project becomes a symbol of creativity and humanity persisting even in captivity, a reminder that these men are more than just prisoners and workers, that they retain their culture and faith and ability to create beauty even behind barbed wire. The nativity scene is unveiled on Christmas Eve 1944, a cold Iowa night when frost glitters on the ground and breath steams in the air. Prisoners gather in the compound far from home, far from the war that still rages in Europe, to celebrate a holiday that transcends national boundaries and reminds them of shared humanity. They sing carols in German, their voices carrying across the frozen fields, while American guards watch from the perimeter, some moved by the music despite not understanding the words. For a few hours, they are not enemies but simply men marking the passage of time, hoping for peace, dreaming of home and families they haven't seen in years. The testimonies accumulate as months pass and more letters make their way home, each one adding to the absurd irony of the situation. A prisoner from Stuttgart writes, "I have never eaten so well in my life, not even before the war when times were good." Another from Dresden notes with careful precision, "American children eat better than German adults. I see them in town, healthy and strong, while my nephew writes that he is always hungry." A third observes with the detail of a man who cannot quite believe his own experience. "We have milk and butter for breakfast, fresh fruit whenever we want it. My sister writes that she hasn't seen butter in 6 months, and fruit is a memory from before the war." The absurdity deepens with every letter, every meal, every pound gained, every day that passes in comfortable captivity. These men are prisoners of war, technically captives of the enemy, yet they live better than they did as free soldiers in the Wehrmacht. They are safer than their families at home, healthier than German civilians, better fed than the children they left behind. The war has inverted every expectation, turned every assumption upside down, created a reality that makes no sense according to the propaganda they were raised on. Defeat has become victory. Captivity has become salvation. The enemy has become, if not friend, then at least humane captor. Medical care reinforces the paradox in ways that become impossible to ignore. Prisoners receive treatment according to United States Army standards, the same care American soldiers get in military hospitals. Camp doctors treat injuries and illnesses with modern medicine and adequate supplies, resources that are increasingly scarce in Germany, where hospitals struggle to function under bombing and shortages. Red Cross parcels arrive regularly with additional food, clothing, and medical supplies, supplementing what the camp provides. Men who might have died of infections or injuries in German field hospitals, where supplies are limited and doctors overwhelmed, recover fully in American prison camps, where penicillin and other modern medicines are available. The contrast with civilian Germany becomes unbearable to contemplate for prisoners who receive letters from home. While prisoners in Iowa gain weight and health, German children develop rickets from malnutrition, their bones softening from lack of calcium and vitamin D. While prisoners receive dental care and medicine, German hospitals run out of basic supplies like bandages and anesthesia. While prisoners sleep in heated barracks with real beds, German families freeze in bombed-out buildings or crowd into cellars that offer shelter but no comfort. The war that was supposed to bring glory to the fatherland and living space in the East has instead brought suffering to everyone, except those who surrendered to the enemy. Security at Camp Algona is professional but not oppressive, a balance that reflects American military doctrine and Geneva Convention requirements. Armed guards patrol the perimeter in shifts, watching for escape attempts or security breaches. Daily counts ensure all prisoners are accounted for, a ritual repeated multiple times to prevent anyone from slipping away unnoticed. Inspections check for contraband and escape preparations, though guards find little evidence of either. The prisoners understand the rules. Work hard, follow orders, don't cause trouble, and life will remain tolerable. Most comply willingly, recognizing that they have stumbled into a situation far better than they had any right to expect. In June 1944, 2 prisoners attempt escape, tunneling under the fence during the night in a plan that shows more desperation than wisdom. They are recaptured within days, cold and hungry, realizing that escape in rural Iowa is nearly impossible for men who speak little English, have no money or resources, and have nowhere to go in a country at war. The incident leads to a temporary change in camp command and tighter security measures, but it remains an isolated event. Most prisoners have no desire to escape, a fact that puzzles some American guards until they understand the logic of the situation. Why would they escape? Escape means leaving safety for danger, abundance for scarcity, comfort for uncertainty. Escape means risking being shot by guards or civilians who might mistake them for saboteurs or spies. Escape means trying to return to a Germany that is losing the war, a homeland that is being bombed into rubble, families that are starving and homeless. The logic of escape collapses under the weight of reality. Prison in Iowa is objectively better than freedom in Germany. Captivity is safer than home. The war has created a situation so absurd that rational self-interest demands staying imprisoned. The Geneva Convention of 1929 proves its worth in unexpected ways that its drafters might not have anticipated. The treaty requires humane treatment of prisoners, adequate food and shelter, medical care, and protection from violence and exploitation. The United States, calculating that compliance will ensure reciprocal treatment of American prisoners in German hands, follows these rules meticulously. The result is a system where legal obligations align with practical benefits, where doing the right thing also serves national interests. Healthy prisoners work harder and more efficiently than starved, beaten men. Well-fed workers bring in larger harvests, generating economic value that justifies their maintenance costs. Humane treatment reduces resistance and escape attempts, making camps easier and cheaper to manage. The moral high ground provides propaganda value, demonstrating American values to the world and to German prisoners who might carry those lessons home after the war. What begins as legal compliance becomes pragmatic policy, and pragmatism produces the unexpected outcome of prisoners living better than civilians. The calculation is cold but effective, a demonstration of enlightened self-interest. The United States needs farm labor to maintain agricultural production, while millions of American men serve in the military. Prisoners provide that labor at minimal cost. Keeping them healthy and productive serves American interests more effectively than cruelty or neglect would. The Geneva Convention provides the legal framework that makes the arrangement acceptable to international observers and the American public. Economic necessity drives implementation, and the result is German prisoners gaining 15 pounds, while German children starve, an outcome that serves American interests while accidentally providing humanitarian benefit. Victory in Europe comes on May 8, 1945, when Germany surrenders unconditionally after Hitler's suicide and the fall of Berlin to Soviet forces. The war that consumed the continent for 6 years, killing tens of millions and destroying entire cities, ends in total defeat for the Reich that promised 1,000 years of glory. In Camp Algona, prisoners receive the news with mixed emotions that reflect their complex situation. Relief that the killing has stopped, that the war that destroyed their continent is finally over. Fear for families they haven't heard from in months, wondering who survived the final brutal battles in the Soviet advance. Uncertainty about what comes next, about their own futures and the future of their defeated nation. They are not immediately repatriated. The harvest still needs to be brought in, and the labor shortage persists even after victory. Through the summer and autumn of 1945, German prisoners continue working Iowa farms, now as prisoners of a defeated nation rather than an enemy power still fighting. The work continues, the food continues. The strange limbo of comfortable captivity extends into peacetime, a transition period where the war is over but its consequences continue to unfold. Repatriation begins in late 1945 and continues into 1946 as ships become available and Germany stabilizes enough to receive returning prisoners. Prisoners board trains and ships for the journey back to Germany, leaving behind the abundance of Iowa for the devastation of their homeland. Many go reluctantly, dragging their feet, knowing what awaits them. They know what the letters have told them: destroyed cities, scattered families, economic collapse, occupation by Allied forces, and the shame of total defeat. They are going home, but home no longer exists in any form they would recognize. The final irony plays out as prisoners return to find their worst fears confirmed and exceeded. Germany is a wasteland beyond anything they imagined. Cities are rubble, entire neighborhoods reduced to broken bricks and twisted metal. Millions are dead or missing. Families scattered across occupation zones or lost entirely. The economy has collapsed completely, with worthless currency and no functioning markets. Food is scarce, distributed by occupation authorities in rations that barely sustain life. The future is uncertain, with the nation divided among victorious powers and no clear path forward. Men who spent years as prisoners in Iowa, eating apple pie and gaining weight, working in peaceful fields under blue skies, return to find their families living in cellars, surviving on scraps, traumatized by years of bombing and the final brutal battles of the war's end. Some prisoners never forget their time in Iowa, carrying memories of abundance and unexpected humanity through the hard years of Reconstruction. Decades later, in the 1970s and 1980s, they return as free men, bringing wives and children to see the place where they spent the war. They visit the Kossuth County Fairgrounds, now returned to its peacetime purpose of livestock shows and community events. They seek out the farmers they worked for, old men now, to shake hands and share memories of a strange time when enemies worked side by side. They bring photographs and letters, tangible proof of the strange chapter in their lives when being a prisoner meant being saved, when defeat meant survival. Edward Kibe's nativity scene survives the war and the camp's closure, preserved by local residents who recognize its artistic and historical value. The carved figures are eventually displayed in Algona, becoming a tourist attraction and a memorial to the camp's existence. The craftsmanship speaks across decades, a testament to human creativity persisting even in captivity, a symbol of the unexpected humanity that characterized Camp Algona. Visitors marvel at the detail and skill, learning the story of the German architect who created beauty behind barbed wire. The Algona POW Museum opens to preserve the camp's history and educate future generations about this footnote in World War II. Artifacts, photographs, letters, and testimonies are collected and displayed with careful curation. The museum tells the story of the camp, the prisoners, the farmers, and the strange intersection of war, necessity, and humanity that occurred in rural Iowa during the 1940s. School groups visit to learn about this chapter of history that challenges simple narratives of good and evil. Veterans return to remember and reflect. The museum becomes a place of education and reconciliation, preserving memory while promoting understanding. The enduring paradox of Camp Algona resists easy interpretation even decades later. How do we understand a situation where enemies were treated better than friends, where prisoners became healthier than civilians, where captivity meant salvation? The story challenges simple narratives of good and evil, victor and vanquished, freedom and imprisonment. It reveals the complexity of war and the unexpected outcomes that emerge when legal frameworks, economic necessity, and human pragmatism intersect. Perhaps the answer lies not in moral superiority, but in the intersection of law, necessity, and pragmatism. The Geneva Convention provided the framework that made humane treatment legally required. The labor shortage provided the necessity that made prisoner employment economically essential. American abundance, the product of geography and industrial capacity, provided the means to feed prisoners well, and Iowa farmers, focused on bringing in their crops and sustaining their livelihoods, provided the human element that transformed legal obligation into something approaching decency. The lesson, if there is one, is that humanity can emerge from unexpected places and unexpected motivations, not from ideology or sentiment, but from practical calculation and legal compliance. Not from friendship or forgiveness, but from the simple recognition that healthy workers are more productive than starved ones. Not from moral superiority, but from the accident of geography that left American farms untouched while European cities burned. The outcome was humane, but the motivation was pragmatic, a reminder that good results can emerge from self-interested calculations. The fairgrounds in Algona are quiet now on ordinary days, busy only during annual events that bring the community together. The barracks are long gone, demolished after the war and replaced by exhibition halls and livestock pens. Nothing remains of the camp except photographs in the museum, memories in the minds of aging veterans, and the nativity scene carved by a German architect far from home. But the story persists, passed down through generations, taught in schools, preserved in archives, a reminder of the strange lottery of war and the unexpected humanity that can emerge even in the darkest times. In that lottery, some men drew the winning ticket not through victory but through defeat, not through conquest but through capture, not through freedom but through imprisonment. German soldiers who surrendered to American forces in North Africa or Europe, who expected brutality and found abundance, who gained 15 pounds eating apple pie and bacon while their families starved in Berlin, who worked Iowa farms while their cities burned, who survived the war in comfortable captivity while millions died in combat and bombing raids. They called it winning the lottery, and in the cruel mathematics of World War II, perhaps they were right. They survived when millions didn't. They ate when millions starved. They worked in peace when millions died in violence. They returned home eventually to rebuild from the ruins, carrying memories of Iowa that seemed like dreams. And for the rest of their lives, they carried the memory of cornfields and apple pie, of American abundance and unexpected decency, of the strange time when being a prisoner of war meant being fed better than home, when losing meant winning, when captivity meant salvation. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you forgotten chapters of history that deserve to be remembered. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most about Klaus Weber's story. Your support helps us continue sharing these remarkable true stories with the world.